They thought she was just a lost old woman. When Eleanor Harper stepped onto the stage of America's Spotlight, trembling in her pale blue floral dress, the show's director raised an eyebrow and signaled to his assistant, "Put her on early." The audience will enjoy this. They called it a light-hearted moment, a touching, slightly comical performance that would be cut after the first round. But no one expected Eleanor Harper to silence the entire room. Before we continue Eleanor's inspiring journey, if you also believe that a person's true worth lies not in their age or appearance, but in their perseverance and undying passion, please like and subscribe to help us share more heartwarming stories like this one with the world. And now, let us return to the story, where surprises are still waiting just ahead. That morning, in the quiet town of Ashland, Oregon, Eleanor sat by her window as soft spring sunlight streamed through lace curtains that had hung there for over 30 years. She adjusted her reading glasses and focused on the crossword puzzle in her morning paper. 7 letters, she murmured. A musical term meaning very loud, fortissimo, she smiled, writing it in with an old fountain pen. At 72, Eleanor led a simple life. Widowed for more than 20 years, she lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Morning coffee, afternoon reading, weekly book club at the local library, and evenings singing in the church choir. She never stood in the spotlight, always blending her voice into the back row. The ringing phone broke her train of thought. Eleanor picked up and held it to her ear. "Ellie, it's Ruthie, from choir." "Oh, hello, Ruthie. What brings you?" "Calling so early? Have you seen the news? America's Spotlight is holding auditions right at the City Convention Center next Tuesday." Eleanor laughed, her voice touched with surprise. "You know those shows aren't for people like me." "What are you saying? I've heard you sing when you thought no one was listening. You have a voice that can still a sanctuary. Even Pastor Williams said so." Eleanor was about to protest, but her hand gently touched a small music box sitting on the table beside the sofa, the only keepsake from her youth when she once dreamed of being a singer. The silver-plated box still played its familiar melody every time she opened the lid. How long had it been since she last thought about the stage? That night, Eleanor stood in front of the bathroom mirror, quietly examining herself. The lines around her eyes and mouth marked time. Sleepless nights. Over her daughter, over losses, over the long ache of solitude. She began to hum softly at first, then let her voice grow freer, fuller. In that moment, Eleanor was no longer the elderly woman in a small apartment. She was the 20-year-old girl standing on stage at her university music recital, before Professor James Winters looked at her with cold eyes and declared, "Technically sound. But you lack fire. You lack artistry." That remark had crushed Eleanor's dream. She abandoned music, switched to education, and later faded into a life of privacy and quiet routine. But just a few blocks away, Ruthie Campbell was doing something Eleanor never expected, uploading a secret video clip of Eleanor singing Amazing Grace during last year's Easter service, when the choir's lead soloist had been absent and Eleanor had stepped in. It had been a spontaneous moment, but the recording was about to change everything. 3 days later, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Harper, this is Ryan Matthews from America's Spotlight," came the confident male voice. "We just saw a video of an extraordinary voice during a church service. That was you, wasn't it?" Eleanor hesitated. I didn't send anything. Perhaps someone else did. But I have to say, that voice moved us deeply. We'd like to invite you to perform on next week's broadcast." Eleanor froze. A mix of fear, disbelief, and a flicker of hope stirred within her. "Just one song, Mrs. Harper. We'll cover all travel and hotel expenses. This could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." She didn't answer right away. What Ryan didn't mention was a small red mark already placed on her file next to the letters SE, short for sympathetic elimination, meaning a contestant brought in to move the audience to tears and then be sent home. After that phone call, Eleanor sat in silence for hours. The pages of her inner diary seemed to be thrown open, old memories flooding in all at once. She didn't know whether this was an opportunity or just a dazzling trap crafted by television. But deep inside, something in her no longer wished to return to silence. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed her daughter's number. "Hi, Mom," Lily answered right away, her voice cheerful on the other end. "You're calling early. What's up?" Eleanor hesitated a bit. "I've been invited to a television show. A show about singing." "What?" Lily almost shouted. "Are you talking about America's Spotlight?" "Yes. They have a video of me singing at church. Probably Ruthie sent it. They've invited me to Los Angeles to perform one song." Lily went silent for a few seconds. Are you going to go?" "At first I thought not. I'm old. No one wants to hear an old lady sing anymore." "That's not true," Lily said, firmly. "You once told me, life expands or shrinks in proportion to one's courage." "That's from Anais Nin," Eleanor chuckled softly. "But you're the one who taught me that." Lily's voice softened. "You gave up so much for me, Mom. When Dad passed, you gave up music, gave up all your dreams, just to raise me. Maybe this is your chance to live for yourself." After that conversation, Eleanor looked around her quiet apartment. On the wall was an old wedding photo with Richard, the gentle husband who died in a car accident when she was 49. On the table was a frame of Lily at her medical school graduation. Every single item in the room reminded her of silent sacrifices. She suddenly realized it was time to give something to herself. That evening, Ruthie appeared at the door with a bouquet of tulips and an apologetic face. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have sent the video without asking you first. It's..." "All right, Ruthie." Eleanor opened the door. "I called them back. I'm going." Ruthie nearly cried with joy. "Oh my gosh, I knew you wouldn't regret it. I just knew it." 2 days later, Eleanor stood at the small city airport. An assistant from the show had booked her ticket and arranged a hotel. It was her first time flying in nearly 2 decades. She wore her favorite pale blue floral dress, brought a small suitcase, and carried a notebook with the lyrics to "At Last" by Etta James, the love song her husband used to request whenever they danced in the living room. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, Eleanor felt as though she had stepped into a completely different world. Bustling, noisy, and radiant. A young assistant named Amanda greeted her at the airport, holding a sign. "Eleanor Harper, contestant." "First time on TV?" Amanda smiled without looking up from her phone. "Seems like it," Eleanor replied softly, doubts rising in her chest. The recording center felt like a colorful maze. Long hallways, gleaming glass doors, groups of young people chatting animatedly, heavily made-up faces, dancers rehearsing in corners. Among it all, Eleanor felt like a breeze lost in a storm. The makeup room was crowded. A makeup artist approached and looked her up and down. "I'm Lexi. Today we'll give you a perfect on-camera look." Less than 2 hours later, Eleanor barely recognized herself in the mirror. Silver hair styled into soft waves, her eyes gently highlighted with bronze eyeshadow, pale pink lips, just enough to stand out while still appearing dignified. "Hope you're happy with it. It's unfamiliar but nice." Eleanor smiled gently. In the waiting area, she sat alone, feeling anxious. That was when a young woman with purple-dyed hair and sparkling piercings sat down next to her. "I'm Zoe. I saw you singing at the church in that video. You're the church lady, right? You could call me that. You know, this show always includes one older person for the emotional moment. That's how they produce it." Eleanor paused. "Are you serious? I used to be a backstage assistant for a season. You're not the first to be labeled a sympathy act. But if your voice is anything like that video, maybe they picked the wrong old lady this time." Eleanor looked at Zoe, her eyes unexpectedly glistening. "The song I chose is At Last." It was his favorite. Zoe nodded with admiration. "That's a tough one. But if you believe in what you're singing, make them regret underestimating you." Night fell outside the studio, but inside the light still blazed. The rapid clicking of cameras, the hurried tapping of high heels on tiled floors, the producers calling out to each other in the corridors, all created a whirlwind that made Eleanor feel as if she were lost in a maze of other people's dreams. She sat in a small waiting room, her suitcase neatly beside her, the printed lyrics of At Last laid out on the table, a song she had sung hundreds of times in her life, but never in public. Only Richard had ever been her faithful audience, sitting in his armchair, holding a cup of tea, smiling at her as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. The door creaked open. "Mom." Lily stepped in, her face radiant. She had driven through the night from Oregon just to be with her mother before this moment. "What are you doing here? You've got a surgery scheduled tomorrow," Eleanor exclaimed in surprise. "I postponed it," Lily said, pulling her mother into a tight hug. "This is the moment when you need me more than any operation does." They sat side by side, hand in hand. Eleanor whispered, "I feel like an imposter, Lily. Everyone out there is talented, young, and me. I'm just an old lady who sings in her bathroom. No, you're the one who taught me that music doesn't need a big stage or a full audience. It only needs to be sincere." Lily looked at her mother seriously, then pulled out her phone. "I want you to see this." She played the video Ruthie had recorded. The image was grainy, the sound imperfect. But what made Eleanor freeze was the faces of those who were listening. Elderly men and women in the church pews, well-behaved children sitting quietly, all with eyes glistening. Some had their heads in their hands, others closed their eyes as if soothed by something sacred. "That's the power of your voice," Lily whispered. "It's not about technique, it's about emotion, it's about truth." Eleanor stayed silent for a long moment. When a production assistant knocked and announced she had 15 minutes left, she stood up, exhaling as if releasing a weight. "All right. I won't back down," Lily smiled, wiping the corner of her eye. "I've always known you're the bravest person I've ever met." After Lily left, Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror. She was no longer the old woman with a broken dream. No longer the student who once wept in Professor James Winters's office when he bluntly said, "You don't have fire. You don't have what makes people remember." That day, Eleanor had left the music department, convincing herself she wasn't good enough. But today, those cruel words would no longer be the final thing she heard about herself. She adjusted. The collar of her dress pressed her lips together and applied a touch of rose-colored lipstick. "Ready," she said to herself, and stepped out of the room. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense like a tightly drawn string. Other contestants clustered in small groups, laughing, encouraging one another, some doing last-minute vocal warm-ups. A young man tuned his guitar. A dance group rehearsed one final sequence. As Eleanor walked past, a few people paused, briefly surprised. But no one said a word. Ryan Matthews, the producer, appeared beside her, his smile perfectly polished for television. "Mrs. Harper, it's your turn." "Are you expecting anything?" she asked, eyes steady. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "I'm expecting." One moment of silence from the audience. But both of them understood the subtext. It wasn't a compliment. It was how people referred to a graceful farewell act. She simply smiled and nodded, giving no reply. Far off, Zoe, the purple-haired girl, stood at the wing, her eyes following Eleanor. As the older woman passed by, Zoe whispered, "Sing for yourself, just for you." Eleanor nodded slightly, then stepped forward. Beneath her feet, the wooden stage echoed each step. Ahead, a blinding spotlight burned hot, and a sea of people, dark, expectant, waited for something to laugh at. "Next up on our stage," the host announced with enthusiasm, "is a grandmother from Ashland, Oregon, a town where dreams never sleep. Please welcome Eleanor Harper." A polite round of applause rose. Not excited, not mocking, just the habitual courtesy of a live audience. The stage lights beamed straight into Eleanor's eyes, blinding her to the faces of the 200 people seated below. She could only feel the silence settling, the audience's eyes drawn to the pale floral dress, to her aged hands trembling ever so slightly. 3 judges sat before her, a former teen pop idol, a legendary silver-haired music producer, and a sharp-tongued Broadway artist, all known for their strict standards. They exchanged looks of surprise and curiosity. The male judge spoke first, his voice gentle, but clearly assessing. "Mrs. Harper, can you tell us what brought you here?" "Today?" Eleanor took a breath, recalling what the producers had advised. "Talk about your inspiring journey, how age doesn't limit dreams and so on." But she chose honesty. "Actually, I didn't apply. A friend sent in a video of me singing at church and I didn't know." A ripple of soft laughter spread through the audience. Not mocking, sympathetic, kind. "So what will you be singing today?" "At Last" by Etta James. It was my husband's favorite song. The female judge squinted. "That's a tough one." "Yes," Eleanor nodded. "But I've lived every word of it." The opening notes began to play, their delicate phrasing stirring old memories. Eleanor closed her eyes, drew a deep breath and opened her mouth. "At last." The first line came out slightly husky, soft, but by the second, her voice grew steadier, richer, as if something inside her had just been unlocked. In the control room, Ryan Matthews leaned back in his chair. "Get ready for audience reaction close-ups," he told the director, smirking. But then, something no one expected happened. On stage, Eleanor began to lift the mic from its stand. Her hands no longer shook. Her face no longer held fear. That voice, it was no longer the voice of an old woman, but of someone who had loved and lost, who had suffered and hoped, who had stepped back only to rise again. That voice wasn't perfect, but every note was so true that the air in the room thickened. "My lonely days are over." One row of audience members grew misty-eyed. An older man gripped his wife's hand tighter. A 10-year-old girl stared at her with wide eyes. Backstage, Zoe whispered, "She's not just singing. She's reliving her entire life." Eleanor moved closer to the edge of the stage. She spread, her arms as if embracing someone invisible, maybe Richard, maybe her 20-year-old self. The final line soared, "You are mine. At last." 3 seconds. 5. Not a single sound. Then one woman stood up and clapped, then another. And suddenly the whole auditorium erupted, a thunder of applause, whistles, cheers, like a wave crashing onto the stage. At the judges' table, the Broadway artist wiped away tears. The pop singer stood, clapping without pause. The legendary producer only shook his head, stunned. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Eleanor stood still, the light shining on her face. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She looked down at the crowd with a calm, peaceful gaze, as if she knew, if only for once, she had done something right. A tissue was gently placed in her hand, from the host, now stepping up beside her. "Mrs. Harper," he said, voice shaking with emotion. "I think we all share the same thought right now. Thank you for reminding us what real music truly is." The next morning, in a hotel room overlooking Hollywood Boulevard, Eleanor sat quietly beside a cup of chamomile tea. Gentle spring sunlight fell across her simple nightgown. Lily was curled up on the sofa, eyes glued to her phone, endlessly, refreshing the latest reactions. "Mom," she shouted, "your performance video has over 3 million views on YouTube. People are calling you America's grandma and the voice of grace. Rolling Stone even wrote an article about you." Eleanor simply smiled. She didn't care about the views or the nicknames people gave her. What moved her were the comments, from the young, the elderly, and those who had once given up on their dreams because of age, criticism, or fear. "I'm 60 and just signed up for my first singing class thanks to you. I cried listening to you. You reminded me of my mother. Your voice is the healing sound I didn't know I needed." There was a knock at the door. 3 taps. Lily opened it and turned back with a look of surprise. "Mom, someone's here to see you. It's Ryan Matthews." Eleanor adjusted her collar and stood. The television producer entered, holding a bouquet of tulips and an envelope. The smile was still professional, but this time his eyes had changed. Mrs. Harper, he began, slightly awkward. I'm here to say thank you. And I'm sorry. She waited quietly for him to continue. Yesterday, we thought we had a touching moment that would boost ratings. But you silenced us in the truest sense. Last night's broadcast had the highest viewership of the season. He handed her the envelope. 3 record labels called us this morning. They want to meet with you, not just because of your voice, but because you have a story, and something very real, something you can't script. Eleanor accepted the envelope but didn't open it right away. You know, she said, being underestimated is a gift sometimes. Gives you the element of surprise. Ryan nodded slightly. I understand now. That afternoon, before leaving Los Angeles, Eleanor received a message from an unknown number. The screen read, "This is James Winters. I'm 92, living in Florida. I saw you on television last night. I was wrong. So wrong it can't be undone. You've always been a true artist. I'm sorry." Eleanor read the words once, then again, and a third time. Then she set the phone down and closed her eyes. After 50 years, a long locked door had finally opened. Not with anger, but with forgiveness. On the flight back to Oregon, she looked out at the blue sky, softly humming. At last, my love has come along. And for the first time in half a century, Eleanor Harper was no longer afraid of the spotlight. She had stepped into the light, not to be praised, but simply to be seen as herself. And so, the story of Eleanor Harper comes to a close, a journey of rediscovering oneself after 50 years of silence. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to help us continue sharing more heartfelt, hopeful, and deeply human stories like this one. We'll see you again in the next journey.